thank you already for your attention. Your attention is the most important gift you can give. If we be really attentive at work, really focused on a task, we might call that form of attention concentration. If you've been lucky enough to be in a relationship where the other person has made you feel like the center of their universe, then we might call that love. And if you haven't already, don't worry, it'll come. All of you here now, focused on the wonderful speakers here today, focused on our red dots, giving us your attention. We might call that presence. Attention is the most fantastic gift you can give. Some people say time's your greatest asset. I prefer attention because it forces you to ask the question, how am I going to spend that time? And as human beings, when we focus our attention, we can achieve amazing things. We can send people to the moon. We can progress towards curing horrible diseases like cancer. And we can create technologies that connect us with the sum-told knowledge of the whole human race just through a simple web search. And we can also create technologies that connect us all together, so you can speak to anybody, anytime around the world. I think there's a problem brewing here. And the problem is, paradoxically, that same technology, I think, is threatening our ability to pay attention. So the average smartphone user touches their phone something like 2,600 times a day in about 150 different sessions. Because of the type of audience you are, you're probably a bit above average as well. So you're probably in the 3,000, 3,500 touching per day. And all of this is brand spanking new. It's come about in the last 5 or 10 years or so. So what does that kind of look like in a typical day? Well, here's kind of my diary. Yeah, here's my sort of work diary. Typical day, I'll set my alarm for 7, I'll get up, go and have some breakfast, travel to work. I'll sort of spend the first hour or so writing some strategy paper because that's when I'm most tuned in. It's early in the morning, my brain's buzzing. I'll write some strategy. I might meet the boss in the cafe, do some other presentation like a TED talk, get into that in the morning, meet with the team, have some lunch to recharge and refresh, go off into the city and meet some people, come back again and finish off with a bit of admin, just to kind of tidy up the day. That's sort of, if you look at my calendar, that's what my workday kind of looks like. It's a typical workday. In reality, if we're not careful, it can look very different to this, though. So quite often I'll wait before the alarm goes off and I'll reach over to check what time it is. And of course, suddenly up there's a little Facebook notification saying that I've got a new message or a new share or a new comment or so. So I'll have a quick look at that, and that'll take me off into 6 or 12 different things, and I might comment on a couple of things. Then I think, oh no, I must, the alarm hasn't gone off yet. I'll just pop it back on the bedside table, but before I do, I'll just have another little swipe down and a refresh just to check again. Before I doze off again for kind of 5-10 minutes. Then the alarm goes off and I'll reach for the alarm, which of course is my smartphone, so the first thing I see is more kind of notifications, so I'll probably spend a little bit of time on them. And then I'll go down to a breakfast and have some travel, but while I'm at breakfast I'm kind of checking again, having a quick sneaky look and doing some more updates. And it's interfering with me writing my strategy paper, the notifications, all those naughty pings and dings and vibrations in your pocket are distracting you from your real kind of work, your deep creative task that you have to do. I'm going to meet the boss in the cafe, so I probably won't check Facebook then. I'll be a bit more professional and have a quick look at my LinkedIn. And this kind of goes on. Throughout the day, this kind of goes on. Right. And of course, it's not just Facebook, is it? Of course it's not Facebook. We've got Twitter to deal with, and we've got LinkedIn to deal with, and we've got email, which kind of expands to fit the remaining kind of available space. And you'll see I've kind of left kind of 11 or 12 o'clock as a nice blank space, but just before we go to bed, we'll have another little swipe and have a look, won't we? Just see what's happening out in the world that we've missed. And this isn't the full picture, of course, is it either? This isn't the full picture. This is what days look like for people at the moment. And of course, this bleeds into our personal life in the evenings, and suddenly our kind of loving relationships start to look a bit like two people connected to the rest of the planet, but not to each other. And after a while, this whole kind of thing just feels like it's crowding out the rest of life. There was a wonderful parody a few years ago. I don't know if anybody saw this. Who's played Farmville in the past? So Farmville was a game, online game. About 9 years ago, it reached 100 million players worldwide. It was a Facebook game. And it really started, it was the first engine of this compulsion to go back and click on things and touch your phone and touch them. And it was a game. And you've bought virtual crops and planted them in virtual fields, sold them in virtual markets for virtual money, which you used to buy more virtual crops and pigs and sheep and cows and grow them bigger and then sell them and so on and so on and so on. And you could buy a virtual tractor for $5, which would enable you to do that a lot faster. And you could go and visit friends' farms. But it was just this compulsive. Tens of millions of young boys were getting up in the morning and being in time for school because they were getting up to check their farm first before they went into school. Anyway, so there's one good thing came out of it. This guy developed this parody called Cow Clicker, and you just had an image of a cow. And what you had to do was every 6 hours go back and click on the cow, and if you went back and clicked on the cow, you earned the right to click on the cow again in six hours' time. And you could buy more clicks to click on your cow by spending what he called Mooney virtual currency. And Mooney obviously was a reference to the cow, but it was also a reference to Bill Mooney, who was the vice president of Zynga, the company that made Farmville. And this kind of predated a lot of these applications that we use, that we constantly kind of get embarked at by our technology to kind of respond to. And I see this in real life a lot. A few years back I was doing some work in the music industry, and you go to a rock concert now, and half the people, the production company spent hundreds of thousands of pounds creating this wonderful high-fidelity experience, this incredible audio and the lasers and the light show. And the band spent years rehearsing their stagecraft to give you this fantastic experience, and half the people are up there looking, it's there, and they're looking up here through this crappy little device, recording it with an awful sound quality that they're going to share for a whole load of people who don't really care. Kind of weird to me. It's sort of showing up for the concert, but missing the gig. And I see exactly this at work, where constant interruptions. You know, people say we're supposed to be good at multitasking. You know, I wonder if multitasking is kind of screwing up multiple things at the same time. I might be really bad at multitasking, of course, because of my age, because of my gender, because of the wine quantity I drink in the evenings, or because of technology. I'm going to blame the last one. I think technology is very interruptive, very destructive, and actually research shows that if you're involved in a really creative task that needs your attention, and you get distracted, it takes you 25 minutes to get back on task. You imagine what that's doing to your ability to be creative. And even worse, these constant interruptions knock 15 IQ points off your intelligence. It's like losing a full night's sleep. And perhaps even worse than that, there's some evidence to suggest that it's physically damaging the area of our brain that deals with emotional intelligence, how we relate with each other and the rest of the world. And possibly these increases in depression statistics, work dissatisfaction, are maybe symptoms of some of this. So I think your attention is under threat from these kind of crazy kind of Facebook, or not just Facebook, but social media updates, your phone pinging that there's new messages when you're sitting there with your partner in the evenings, and of course the email. So why is this? Well, let's look back a little bit. I think the same reason we haven't quite sorted out how to use this technology yet is the same reason why people get scared of horror films. So it's weird, isn't it? We've had television for a long time. We shouldn't be scared of anything that comes on the TV. We've had Coronation Street for 75 years. We ought to be used to anything. Yet I know that big fake plastic white shark isn't going to leap out of the screen and maul me, but I still hide behind a pillow, or jump or chuck a glass of wine over my partner. And why is that? Why? I mean, it's an interesting question, right? Why is it? We've all got TVs in the house. We should be used to this by now. So to explore this a bit, let me leap back in time a little bit. We're just going to pop back roughly 6 million years. So on this screen here, you've got 6 million years worth of human history, and we're in this bottom right-hand block here. So 60,000 blocks on the screen, each one represents 100 years of human history, and here we all are together in this last one. Human development, if you like, the hominids development started 6 million years ago, top left-hand corner, and time flows left to right down to the bottom. Our relationship with technology didn't really begin until about 3.4 million years ago. Early evidence of hand tool use. Rough rocks, sharpened rocks, and animal bones to dig up termites and roots. That was pretty much it in terms of technology for at least another 1.6, 1.8 million years or so, when we started creating our own hand tools, early hand axes, and carrying those with us to kind of, you know, sort of do the same thing. It's also the first time, apparently, that we sort of moved out of the African continent. Then about 700,000 years ago, we started to master fire, so we could sit around in circles like this and start to communicate. 400,000 years ago, we discovered sort of how to, the usefulness of shelters, and all this time brains are starting to grow bigger and more complicated until we get to this segment down here where we all are. Modern human beings, Homo sapiens, us, 200,000 years ago, emerging out of the Great Rift Valley in what we now call Ethiopia. So let's zoom in on that. Each block now still represents 100 years, 2,000 blocks on the screen. For much of that time as Homo sapiens, we were still wandering around the continents, foraging for food where we found it. 45,000 years ago, first time we kind of hit Europe. And then in the last 10,000 years or so, we harnessed agriculture, which means we could grow food in places other than where it was growing, which led to settlements and towns, and eventually cities in the sort of the last kind of 5,000 years. If we zoom in on those last two blocks, the last couple of hundred years, last 150 years, which this region's predominantly responsible for, the Great Industrial Revolution, which really formed the modern world that we're all kind of trying to get used to now. Zoom in on that final 100 years, the BBC broadcast its first experimental broadcast 95 years ago. Like I say, Coronation Street popped out about 20 years later. Early internet, in the 50s, as George Dyson, the science historian, points out, for the first 5 years of the internet, it was about 5 kilobytes big. That's about half the length of an MP3 audio, half a second, sorry, of MP3 audio. So think about that, and they were using it to look at issues of nuclear fission and planetary movements and explore human development. So when your 64 gigabyte smartphone isn't big enough anymore, you need to upgrade, just think about what those guys were doing with 5 kilobytes back there. And then Tim Berners-Lee kind of gave us the World Wide Web, which is what most people, a bit of the internet that most people call the internet and most people use. And then in this final slither 10 years ago, smartphones hopped onto the scene, and that's when the fire hose of interruption really started. Just think about what you've seen there. 60,000 blocks representing 6 million years of human history. We've zoomed in on that last little segment in the bottom of 200,000 years of Homo sapien development, zoomed in on the final block of that, and this little slither has had such a massive impact on us so suddenly that we haven't got used to it. And I think that's the same reason why we jump when we see a shark on the screen. For most of human development, if a shark was swimming towards you, it really was swimming towards you. If a tiger was running towards you, it really was running towards you. We haven't got used to television, let alone the power of this technology, which is kind of barking orders at us all the time. This sort of adult-child relationship. Ding, new notification, must respond, must respond. We haven't quite developed the mental approach, I think, to sort of address the technology. If we want to focus on something really meaningful and creative, I just suggest we can do simple things like turn off those notifications. Focus on that one thing that you want to focus on. It'll all still be there. You can always go back in. It'll all still be there. So, final thought to kind of leave you with. More blocks. Before, we were looking at each block as 100 years of human history. Each block now is 100 seconds. 864 blocks, 86,400 seconds that every one of you has in a day to do something meaningful and useful and self-fulfilling with. Quite a chunk of those blocks are already taken up by sleep, of course. A chunk more is taken up by travel and by hygiene factors and eating. And my question is, what are we going to do with the rest of that time, the rest of our available time? Are we going to fill it with this? And if your answer is yes, I like that, fine, knock yourselves out. But be aware of it. Perhaps you want to carve out some of your time by turning off those notifications, buying an old retro alarm clock in your bedroom to wake you up in the morning and leaving your phone downstairs on charge. Perhaps you want to carve out some of this time for some deep creative thought, uninterrupted time, to help think about some of the bigger problems facing civilization, to work in an uninterrupted manner more closely with your team. If you went to a meeting at work and took a random stranger in who knew nothing about what you were talking about at work and kept interrupting you all the time, you'd be fired, wouldn't you? Or you'd certainly never be invited to any more meetings, which might be a good outcome. Yet we all do that. That person is your smartphone, and everybody takes one with them. You might spend it on more creative, self-fulfilling pursuits, learning about science, learning a new art. Or you might spend it to focus on relationships, kind of uninterrupted. Your smartphone will continually call for your attention for the foreseeable future. And all I want you to do, all I invite you to do, is just question when that happens, do you want to give your attention to that particular activity, or would you like to do something else instead? And I think that's an idea worth spreading. I thank you again for your attention.